Search and rescue operations are ongoing at the former site of the World Trade Center as workers there refusing to give up hope. Almost 5,000 people are missing.
The military announces the first confirmed death in the attack on the Pentagon, where 187 other people are missing and presumed dead.
And New York firefighters bid farewell to 3 of their own, including their chief. I'm Jim Clancy.
And I'm Lolita Vasilova at the CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war. And we begin with the latest developments. Searchers in New York City have found a passport belonging to one of the suspected hijackers. It was discovered several blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, prompting investigators to widen their search for evidence.
A Justice Department official also telling CNN a second person now in FBI custody on a material witness warrant. Now, the man is one of the 25 people who were detained by the U.S. immigration authorities and then questioned by the FBI. Another man was arrested as a material witness, if you'll remember, on Thursday. Rescue workers, meantime, continue to sift through the rubble of the World Trade Center, what was the World Trade Center. They're hoping to find survivors. On Saturday, though, they found none. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani saying he does remain optimistic that perhaps, hoping against hope, someone may be still found alive.
Recovery efforts continue at the Pentagon as well. Authorities say 187 people are missing and presumed dead there. On Saturday, buses brought family members of the victims to the Pentagon. The mourners carried flowers and balloons as they walked around the site. And as U.S. investigators probe more deeply into the terror attacks, some patterns are beginning to emerge, and Mike Betcher has more of that.
To help them better understand the group of people that managed to successfully hijack 4 aircraft, investigators have put together a list of common characteristics of those 19 people. Let's take a look at the list. The first 2 items, male, early 20s, that's obvious. But it also says they're likely to have Saudi passports, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia, and also clean-shaven and Western appearance. Now, we also have another document which was given as evidence in the African embassy trial, and it is the Al-Qaeda training manual. Al-Qaeda, of course, the group U.S. officials say is the terrorist umbrella organization under Osama bin Laden, and this is their operational manual, the thing that they gave to their operatives worldwide, telling them how to carry out an operation. We thought we would compare this to the common characteristics on the list. Let's look at items number 3 and 4, likely to have a Saudi passport, likely to have visas issued in Saudi Arabia. Let's see what the Al-Qaeda trading manual says about that. All documents of the undercover brothers, such as identity card and passport, should be falsified. Now that means, if you look at the common characteristic list, it says most of them have Saudi passports. It's very likely, if this was an Al-Qaeda operation, that those passports, or many of them, were falsified. Let's go back to the common characteristics list. The last item, clean-shaven, Western appearance. Now if you go into the operations manual, let's see what they tell their operatives to do in terms of appearance. It says the photograph of the brother in these documents should be without a beard. So it was followed in this case. And there is one other item that is not a personal characteristic, but it's an operational characteristic. Item number 7 in the operational manual of Al-Qaeda, when it talks about what targets to choose, says blasting and destroying the embassies and attacking vital economic centers. If this was an Al-Qaeda operation, they did follow their manual to a T.
Well, President George W. Bush says those who planned these attacks are mistaken if they think that they're invisible. Mr. Bush is expected to hold talks with his security advisors again today at Camp David. The White House also in contact with governments all around the world as the U.S. is trying to build up a coalition overseas. Mr. Bush asking for unwavering support back at home.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair expressing support for any U.S. retaliation, but says it must be based on hard evidence.
Hundreds of British citizens are missing in the World Trade Center attack. We're about to hear more now from Mr. Blair as we go to Christiane Amanpour in London for an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister. Christiane.
Good morning, Relitza. Good morning, Jim. Prime Minister Tony Blair was one of the first of the U.S. allies to come out and say categorically that the United Kingdom stands shoulder to shoulder with the United States. He also said that Britain's interests are intimately engaged because of the high number of British casualties. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us this morning. Yesterday, the President of the United States said, "We are at war. War has been declared on us." Are you prepared to say that war has been declared and that there is a state of war?
Yes, whatever the technical or legal issues about a declaration of war, the fact is we are at war with terrorism. What happened on Tuesday was an attack not just upon the United States, but upon the civilized world. The thousands of people that lost their lives included nationals of many, many countries. Probably 200-300 people from Britain will have died in that terrorist attack. That makes it, in fact, the worst terrorist attack on British citizens that there has been since the Second World War. So this is a situation that concerns us all. Our own interests are intimately engaged, quite apart from the fact that in these times it's important that America realises that her friends right round the world stand with her.
You and other leaders have talked about a global alliance to combat this global network of terror, and there are obviously many components, including a military component. What will the United Kingdom, what will Britain do if the United States decides to go to war?
This is something, obviously, we are discussing with the American president, the American administration at the moment, what help we can give. And I'm very pleased at the way that America and the American administration has gone out of its way to consult its allies, to keep us fully informed so that we are part of the deliberations they're making. But we have to do two things, in my view. First of all, there has to be a response to bring those terrorists who committed this attack to account, and we will play our full part in that. And secondly, there has then to be an agenda that we construct at an international level that involves the whole of the international community in dismantling the machinery of international terrorism, how it's financed, how these people move about the world, the countries that then harbour them and give them help. At every single level, we have to pursue and dismantle this machinery of terror. And that is important, not just for the purpose of bringing those people to account, but also in order to make sure that this does not happen again.
Britain has stood with the United States in most of its military campaigns of the last 10 years from the Gulf War on. Was it safe to say that if there is a military response, Britain will take part militarily?
Well, we've made it very clear that we stand side by side with the United States. And it's not a question of the United States simply saying, this is what we're going to do now, come and join us. The US is in close consultation with us and with other allies. And I think there will be a very broad support for a response that allows us to pursue and bring to account those responsible for this act and do it as an act of justice.
Do you think that the evidence is out yet? Have you been presented with what you need? You've talked about we need to know who did it, we need to see the evidence.
As President Bush said yesterday, it's fairly clear where the evidence is tending, but I think it is important that we consider the evidence in a very careful way, that it's factually based, that we are hard-headed about it. But once we have come to a conclusion, then it is important that we hold those people who are responsible for this, as I say, to account. And I think you will find, incidentally, that that is the view right round the world. I've spoken to Arab leaders in the past few days that have expressed their outrage at what has happened, their determination that this should be seen as something that the world of Islam is standing against, not merely countries like America and the United Kingdom. And I think you will find that there is enormous support for the idea that we must put together a broad-based coalition that hound these people down and that bring them to account and do it, as I say, for reasons of justice. We owe it to those people that lost their lives, to their families who are grieving, and to our own defence of democracy and liberty and freedom.
Which brings me to the question, you know, a lot of people are looking now at which country can be counted on, so-called, to stand with the United States and which country stand against. In the words of the US President, you're either with us or you're not. We have heard, you know, in the past, we've seen how in some attempts to build coalitions, there are some countries who don't particularly, you know, go rushing into this kind of thing. France sometimes has its own reservations, Germany has its own reservations. Do you think there will be a cohesive Gulf War-style alliance?
I do think that the whole of the civilized world will stand together, yes. When I spoke to President Chirac, myself on the phone yesterday, and I can assure you, I think that the whole of Europe will stand with America on this. Because people know that what happened was not just aimed at America. It was aimed at all of us. I mean, these people believe they can achieve by mass terrorism what they cannot achieve by peaceful, democratic means. And therefore, even though it is in our nature to be reasonable, to proceed very cautiously and carefully, we haven't sought this conflict. When the conflict comes, then as we've learnt before from our history, we have to be prepared to face up to it. And I think that for a long period of time, the world has turned a blind eye, been somewhat indifferent to the menace of international terrorism. And I think we're all, to an extent, culpable in that. But what we've got to do now is to realise that it exists, look at its full power and potency, realise that these people, incidentally, if they could do worse, would do worse. The number of people they kill is not limited by anything other than purely technical capability. There's no morality so far as they're concerned. And once we understand that, then I think it is important that we not merely, as I say, pursue those people who have been directly responsible and hold them to account, but then look at the way that terrorism operates, how it's financed, where it is, and how we pursue it and dismantle it.
Well, today there are reports, for instance, that even in England there's a bank, at least one bank, maybe more, that has been used to channel funds for propaganda for this group. There has been some radical voices in the Islamic community here calling for martyrdom and, standing against the United States in this matter. What does a democracy such as yours and other democracies, what can you do? Do you have to sort of encroach on perhaps some of the things that make a democratic world stand apart? Some of the civil liberties, some of the protections on individual freedom of speech, freedom to act, freedom to hide under the banner of religious organizations? I mean, will you crack down here?
We will certainly look, as I think most countries will, at our own domestic laws and see how, in a sense, they measure up to the scale of the problem we now face. And I think we can proceed in a sensible way, which is to say people are perfectly entitled to express their views. And if people want to be anti-British or anti-American, we're Democrats. We believe that people have the right to express their views. But if they are engaged in organising terror or acts of terrorism, then we have got to act against that. And you're right, I think a lot of people will look at, for example, how terrorism is financed, how some of these people do shelter in our country, and not just our country, but other countries, democratic countries around the world. And if this evil of mass terrorism is as we say it is, then we have got to exercise the power and the vigilance to ensure that it's restrained and defeated. Now, I don't believe that that is to act in contradiction of our civil liberties. I believe it is in part pursuing the basic civil liberty that people have to go about their business free from terror.
Do you think there might be, I don't know, a system of identity cards or something similar to that?
Well, I think there are a whole series of things that people will look at in the wake of this. And I think this is the time, as it were, to set an objective and then to consider very carefully how we meet that objective.
Let's go back and talk about the alliance. How do you keep an alliance cohesive over what you've all described as a sustained, long and difficult campaign? It's going to take a long time, apparently, to do what you've described.
Well, of course, it's right in a sense that when we're merely offering words of support, that is, in a way, as I've been saying to people in the last few days, that's the easy part in one sense. I mean, the hard part starts when we actually take the action. But I think that support will be there, not just because of people's sense of horror and outrage at what has happened, but also because of their realization that unless we take action, then we are all at risk. And so it is right for reasons of justice, but it's also right for reasons of self-protection. Now, I'm not saying there won't be difficulties along the way. There always are in these situations. But certainly so far as Britain is concerned, and I really do believe the vast bulk of the civilized world will stand with America.
Have you spoken to your Russian counterpart? Have you spoken to President Putin?
Yes, I have spoken to President Putin.
And what are they prepared to do?
Well, I think obviously you have to